And joining us once again, which means she's been on before, Medea Benjamin is co-founder of Code Pink, the women-led peace group. She's also co-founder of the human rights group Global Exchange. She's an author. She's been an activist for social justice for many, many years. We've had her on to talk about her book on drones, drone warfare, and she has a new book out entitled Inside Iran, The Real History and Politics of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So she joins us now. First of all, Medea, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Richard, thanks for having me on.
Always great to talk to you. And I guess we'll start with this, since we're going to talk about the new book. What was the inspiration for writing it? Obviously, Iran is back in the news. It's never really been out of the news in this country. But what was the inspiration?
Well, I listened to Donald Trump on the campaign trail, and while he actually said some positive things about foreign policy, that, for example, that the war in Iraq was a terrible lie and we should have never gotten into it, he did constantly trash the Iran nuclear deal, partially because it was the signature foreign policy achievement of the Obama administration. So I knew that there was going to be trouble brewing if Donald Trump did indeed win the presidency. And I thought it would be important to have a book out there that looked at the real history of the Iranian Republic, but also, and more importantly, the history of U.S.-Iranian relations and where they might be headed. So right now, we are in a very critical moment around U.S.-Iranian relations, and I've been happy to be going out around the country talking about it, using the book as a vehicle for getting more of a conversation going.
Yeah, I think the timing is very important in this case. And of course, as you well know, Medea, it's not just Donald Trump who has badmouthed what I agree is the signature foreign policy achievement of the Obama administration. Virtually all Republicans I can think of and a number of Democrats have also attacked that deal. It's been unpopular, even though it seems to have been quite successful in easing relationships with Iran and ending the capability development in that country for nuclear arms or nuclear development. So why all the hate is the obvious question. Your thoughts?
I think it's important that you bring up that it's not just the president and not just the Republicans. You know, the Democrats were behind Barack Obama in getting the Iran deal passed, but they have been eerily quiet while the buildup towards what might very well be another war is in the process. I don't see Democrats coming out with statements saying we must keep this Iran nuclear deal. I don't see Democrats backing the Europeans and the Russians and the Chinese who are saying this deal is working. I don't even see Democrats backing the president's Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, who said in a congressional hearing that keeping the U.S. in the Iran nuclear deal was in the new U.S. national interest. So getting back to your question, it's partially because of the tremendous closeness between our politicians and the Israeli government, and then with the Saudi Arabian government as well. Those are two countries that opposed the Iran nuclear deal when it was first negotiated and have opposed it ever since. In fact, Israel has been pushing the United States to bomb the Iranian facilities for a long time. We just saw the spectacle of Benjamin Netanyahu coming out with his amateurist PowerPoint display about how Iran lied, something that went over like a lead balloon in Europe, where they're very much more aware than people are here, that this was not new news, this was old news, and it was precisely because of Iran's program that the nuclear deal was negotiated. So here we are, where most U.S. politicians seem to be more interested in doing the bidding of foreign governments like Israel and Saudi Arabia instead of doing what's in the national interests of the United States.
Well, I can't argue with a single word you've said, and you also, if I recall correctly, have written a book about Saudi Arabia, a country that is, by any measure, has had a number of ties to a lot of actions that are not in our national interest, has close connections to the terrorists behind 9/11, a country that we are actively, here's something, it's a slight digression, Medea, but I think Medea Benjamin, but I think you'll go with me. I think you'll be okay with it. It has continued to infuriate and distress me that when it comes to Syria, we are being told that the only humanitarian thing to do is violate international law and launch missiles. That's what we were being told a couple weeks ago. But when it comes to Yemen, there is no humanitarian interest in a country that the United Nations calls the worst humanitarian catastrophe underway now on the planet. There is no interest in stopping our assistance as we help the Saudis inflict a death and misery through their attacks on that nation. So it seems to me that we're awfully deeply embedded in a very unhealthy way with Saudi Arabia, including helping them commit what to any decent person I would think would appear to be war crimes. And yet, instead of talking about that, everybody's pointing fingers at Iran. Am I wrong?
No, you're totally right. It is just the height of hypocrisy that the U.S. government and the U.S. military continues to sell billions and billions of dollars of weapons to Saudi Arabia, assist the Saudis logistically, and recently we found out it's not just air assistance, it's also Green Berets on the ground who are assisting the Saudis, and creating, as you said, the largest humanitarian catastrophe in the world right now. And in the meantime, because of a wonderful PR campaign that the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has orchestrated, his time in the United States, he met with the elites of this country on every level, from government to business to the entertainment world, including the Hollywood crowd. And the media came off talking about him as a reformist, while he is the one who is the most responsible for the horrendous, relentless U.S. bombing campaign that has killed and maimed and hurt so many people in Yemen.
And I've gone down on this program the statistics of what's going on in Yemen right now in terms of the millions facing starvation, in terms of the children who are more likely than not now to face permanent developmental problems as a result of what we are helping the Saudis do there. But you are absolutely correct. Mohammed bin Salman, who was given, I'm sure some PR person gave him the nickname MBS, and at least two of those letters are apt, in my opinion, was able to win and charm people like the New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman, and so on. So we are at, as always, a maddeningly deceptive and destructive time in our foreign policy. It seems to me not enough progressives are talking about it. So back to your book on Iran, which should help hopefully shift the conversation a little bit. You mention in the book that you've been to Iran a number of times, I think starting in 2008. What has, if anything, surprised you about your visits there?
First, I'm surprised how, given the sanctions that the U.S. and the Western world has imposed on Iran basically since the time of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, it's a middle-class country with a very educated population that, precisely because of the sanctions, has had to develop a lot of its own technology and has been very entrepreneurial in coming up with indigenous solutions to the lack of an ability to import many of the things that they would have normally done. I've been also surprised at how friendly people are to Americans. In my case, a Jewish American, I was reluctant at first to talk about being not only American but Jewish. And every time I brought it up, I was embraced and told about how the Iranian people not only love Americans, but they love Jews. They might not like the Israeli government, but they have a tremendous affinity to Jewish people. They love American culture. They love our movies, our music. A lot of the movies that are seen in the United States are immediately seen in Iran. They have their own thriving cinema there. And I also was surprised at the status of women. While one might be deceived by the superficiality of women having to cover themselves with a scarf and wear modest clothes, beneath that are women who are extremely well educated and involved in all kinds of activities. I managed to meet women in a association of business women twice when I was there, and found that they were doing everything from designing large-scale dams to being electrical engineers to having their own farms. One woman I became quite friendly with had her own business of making medical equipment. So a very well-educated people and very well-educated women. In fact, there have been quotas recently for men because there are so many women at the universities.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a fascinating fact. Look, factlet, if that is a word. Also, by the way, just before we get off this topic of, obviously they're not defined by their relationship to Americans, but as I recall, there were also widespread sort of vigils and demonstrations of support after the 9/11 attack, which again is in pointed contrast to a country like Saudi Arabia. So they're not anti-American by any means. As you say, from your experience, they love Americans, and including Jewish Americans. They certainly were not involved in any way in the terror attacks against us. So that's kind of a slander. Why do you think Netanyahu and Israel are so eager to either see us attack Iran or keep us on a war footing with them? What's the motivation there? Does it have to do with the politics of Hezbollah and other groups, or is there some other reason? Is Netanyahu trying to distract people from his own corruption, or what's going on there, you think?
Well, those are some of the reasons. There have been in the past very good relationships between Iran and Israel during the time of the Shah, although the Shah was very brutal internally. He did welcome the relationship with Israel, and to this day there are synagogues in Iran. It is the largest Jewish population in the Middle East outside of Israel. So it really is, again, about the Israeli government policies. The Iranian government from the very beginning was sympathetic to the Palestinians and has always been championing the Palestinian cause. The Israelis, unfortunately, after the Islamic Revolution, sided with Saddam Hussein in Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War. And that turned a lot of Iranians against the Israeli government. And since then, there have been very difficult relations, just like there have been in the entire Arab world with the Israeli government because of the oppression of the Palestinians. But I think there is a real aggressiveness on the part of Netanyahu particularly to move this one step beyond negative relationships into one where Israel or the U.S. would actually begin bombing of the nuclear facilities. And it's important to note that while Iran has never developed a nuclear weapon, Israel, that is so determined to make sure Iran never has that capacity, is a country that has several hundred nuclear weapons itself, a country that, unlike Iran, has never joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty and has never allowed any inspections of its own facilities. So it's important to note, if your viewers have seen Netanyahu on his rampage against Iran, that while he is calling out the Iranians for development of the intellectual capacity to develop nuclear weapons, his own government has not only developed those weapons, has those weapons, but refuses to publicly acknowledge that they have them. It's the best kept secret, perhaps, in the world.
Yeah, the deliberately poorly kept secret. Unfortunately, we only have about 60 seconds left, Medea Benjamin. So what would you like people to know as we conclude?
I think we have to do something to try to stop the Trump administration from getting the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal. We want to stay in that deal. We want to see that deal survive. And we want to work towards normal relations with Iran so that we can work towards an end to all of the conflicts that have been agonizing the Middle East for the last several decades. They will only end once we get everybody at the table, the Saudis, the Iranians, the U.S., Russia, all the different parties. And so we need to work with Iran for those ends of solving the conflicts, not creating new ones.
Well said. Our guest has been Medea Benjamin. Her new book is Inside Iran, the Real History and Politics of the Islamic Republic of Iran. As always, Medea, great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me on.